moving on to this evening's talk, and a little about Iosif Maravelakis. Iosif is an historian with a long and interesting academic record, having started out in business studies and then sort of moving gradually deeper and deeper into history, archaeology, European and Mediterranean history. Then he got his PhD in modern history. And from all that emerged a book, From Candia to London, an example of a bottom-up exercise of British power in the 19th century Ottoman Empire, very much about foreign policy and how that was implemented in a time of sort of great imperial dynamics between the great powers. So I'm sure, drawing on that, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Iosif Maravelakis to give our talk this evening. So we'll take some questions and comments afterwards. If you would like to ask a question, make a comment, you can either turn on your video and raise a hand and catch my attention. You can raise the Zoom hand, or you can put a question in the chat and I will read it out for you or invite you to do so. I will stop sharing and I will pass to Iosif Maravelakis.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present my new book in this meeting. So I will start share my screen. I hope it's okay. All of you, can you see?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. So as you can see, my new book originates from my PhD, submitted to the LMU in Ludwig Maximilians Universität in München, and I was supervised. I should mention that I am supervised by Professor Dr. Marie Yanin-Kalik and the Associate Professor Ioannis Zelepos. So, in my book, I try to open a new perspective in the field of foreign policy, trying to interpret how the British foreign policy in Crete was exercised by the lower levels of the consular authority. To a large extent, the British foreign policy was determined by decision makers who came from a noble background, which influenced them in the performance of their duties, such as the prime ministers, the foreign secretaries, the ambassadors. However, for a deeper and more comprehensive report on the ongoing conditions in the regions, not only of the British Empire, but also of the British interest, there was a need of consuls and vice-consuls in smaller cities all over the world, under the authority of the British ambassadors. They would be in a state of bidirectional and continuous reformative reciprocation with their superiors. This group did not consist of aristocrats. What could be considered as a significant difference between these two groups is that the second ones were exposed to a completely different environment, since they lived closely to the local populations of the regions of the British interest, having as a direct outcome to be more exposed and open to the need of the locals, to similar experiences and way of thinking with them, or to sometimes act in a more humanitarian way. Most significant is the fact that in some cases, these officials had to care not only for the protection of the interests of the country they represented, but also for their personal ones, since they were involved in multiple actions and had a heterogeneous range of interconnections. So, the overall objective of this project is to display an example of a bottom-up exercise of the British power in the Ottoman Empire by the use of the Cretan case, utilizing by utilizing the Cretan case as an illustrative example. Secondly, it seeks to deepen our comprehensions of British involvement in the Cretan question by highlighting continuity rather than focusing solely on periods of crisis. Additionally, the project endeavors to elucidate the divergences and convergences between the British consular initiatives in Crete and the official stance, examining the political impact of the former on the latter. Ultimately, the book endeavors to uncover how lower-ranking officials navigated their personal interests and sensibilities amidst the British maneuvers from higher echelons. One may ask why Crete was selected as an example case for the study of the British foreign policy from below. So, what makes Ottoman Crete a peculiar case in the Ottoman world? In the approach of this study is the combination of some characteristics. First, the island of Crete was a strategic site for the security of control of the Eastern Mediterranean due to its size and location. A series of revolts broke out there on an ongoing basis during the entire 19th century, incited by the Christian element under the influence of a growing nationalism aiming at the union of the island with the Kingdom of Greece. So as some of you may know, under the influence of the Greek Revolution in the 1820s, the Cretan Christians revolted against the Ottoman and the Egyptian forces. However, in 1830, the great powers intervened to bring peace to the island, but according to the London Protocol signed on 3rd February 1830, Crete would be excluded from the general principle of the Treaty of London, which was signed 3 years ago and defined that the frontier of the Greek state would enclose only the population that participated in the Greek Revolution. The outcome of this unfavorable ending of the revolution was for the island to be bestowed to Mehmet Ali, the governor of Egypt, in exchange for his military support to the Sultan against the Greek insurgents in Crete and Peloponnese. Since 1824, when Mehmet Ali dispatched his troops in Crete, until the Convention of London in July 1840, he was de facto the ruler of Crete, and after the Cretan revolt in the beginning of 1841, the island returned to the Sultan's sovereignty. The greatest part of 19th century can be considered as insurrectionary for Crete, where the same story was constantly repeated. Not in the same way, but it was repeated. This story was an insurgency which was caused by the Christians' desire for unification of the island with Greece and was supported by Greece. Then it led to Ottoman political concession to the Cretan Christians, which in turn were defied by the Porte, triggering the outbreak of a new revolt. However, what makes the island of Crete a notable case for the exploration and the analysis of the British consular policy is the intermingling of this growing insurrectionary climate with a commercial agricultural economy, which sometimes directly or indirectly affected the consular conducts. The British consular officials formed an integral part of the commercial life in the Cretan port towns, either throughout their connections with people involved in trade on the island or because the British consuls were merchants themselves. Both the consular commercial activities and the contacts with the trading element of Crete could therefore have an impact on the operations of the consular officials as representatives of Great Britain in the insurrectionary political situation of the island that London had to deal with. Britain had an extensive network of diplomats, of consular officials in comparison to the size of the island of Crete. This network contained the consul in Canea, who was usually of Britain origin, but familiar with the Greek world, since he had usually acted as a British consul in Levantine areas before his arrival in Canea. During the most part of the 19th century, the British consular service was in need of a consular agent or a vice consul in the smaller urban centers of Rethymno and Heraklion, respectively, who would act under the authority of the consul of Canea. The vice consulship and the consular agency was mainly monopolized by Ionian and Maltese families in Crete. The consul was not so powerful as his superior, the British ambassador in Istanbul, who could sometimes put a limit on the power of the foreign secretary. However, this does not mean that the consul's actions were deprived of flexibility or that they could not take initiatives. As in the case of every consul in the Ottoman Empire, these officials' powers came from their network of family connections extending over several generations. Their heterogeneous variety of networks comprised the high society of the island, such as the Ottoman governor of Crete and other pashas, consuls from other European countries, high Orthodox clergy, the Christians, insurrectionary chiefs, and the British captains based on Malta. The official authority that derived from the consular identity meant nothing with the absence of the above. In other words, this group was involved in a community with divergent interests and wavered among their consular identity, their personal interests, and their social sensibilities. For example, for personal, social, or business reasons, the British consuls have had a completely different relationship with the consul of another country in comparison with the official foreign policy enforced by the countries they served. Such contradiction could sometimes deepen the divergence between the foreign secretaries and the consul's attitude. The current investigation of the bottom-up British policy in Crete begins in 1837. The reason for the selection of this year is the establishment of the British consulate after the dissolution of the Levant Company. The selection of 1878 as a closing date is the Ottoman grant of a semi-autonomous constitution in Crete known as Halepa Pact. From that point and beyond, to some extent, the political action of the island passed into the hands of the locals, who were able to take more initiatives. Moreover, 1878 is a turning point not only for Crete, but for the whole development of the British experience in the Eastern Mediterranean due to the Ottoman cession of the administration of Cyprus. That means that the British decision makers in the Levant had to turn their attention to an additional island in which they acquired a more official ruling. Finally, even though Britain was still leading the way among the great powers, after 1878, further countries were also starting to become involved in the Cretan affairs. The existing historiography has highlighted the British policy in Crete mainly by the European concert point of view and by focusing primarily on periods of crisis and mostly on the third half on the late 19th century, when the great powers rivalry for the Cretan question reached its culmination. However, this study intends to examine the case of Britain and Crete, emphasizing continuity rather than periods of crisis by using a broader chronological approach. The emphasis on periods of tranquility between revolts in Crete is a prerequisite for discovering the multiple tasks of the consuls, as in periods of revolts, the periods of revolts were not very easy to realize this complexity of the roles in the archival research. In the book, I mainly focus on the stories of 4 consular officials who either violated or exceeded their duties. Furthermore, in 3 of these cases, I endeavor to assess the impact of their consular conduct, not only within the consular district of Crete, but also beyond the borders of the island. This achievement would not have been accomplished without the combination of the official consular correspondence and the local archives during the research process. There have been actions thoughts and viewpoints of the consular officials that never reached the ears of London, or when they did, they had been distorted due to the formality of the consular official correspondence. The revelation of the above demands a more indirect way of investigation in a different kind of sources, and more specifically in local archives in Greece. An example of this kind of sources is correspondence of prominent locals with consular officials in Crete, where more free expression is depicted and unofficial actions hidden from the Foreign Office can be illustrated. The first case that the book deals with has to do with the peculiar situation of a consul who had to exceed his duties during the insurrectionary period of 1878. His name is Thomas Sandwith. I think some of you may know him. He is known for his engagement in the negotiation between the Christians and the Ottoman authorities for the design of a semi-autonomous constitution after the insurrection of 1878. However, this burdensome task was something he was instructed to do by the British Embassy and the Foreign Office because of the British involvement in the rescue of the Ottoman Empire during the Balkan crisis. Actually, he did not want to do this, but he said, since I'm instructed, okay, I will do so, I will do it. Moreover, Sandwith's contribution to the pact signing comprised only a minor part of a tremendous effort to cease fire and bring peace to the island, which had begun much earlier. Sandwith was a typical case of a consul bent on fulfilling the above task of ending hostilities. It was far from the official duties of a British consul. It was a task for diplomats and not consuls. Still, at the same time, he needed to display flexible and practical behavior in order to accomplish what he was asked to do. In other words, the story of Sandwith may be presented as a case of a disciplined consul whose personal interests were not mingled with his orders and his instructions, in contrast to the conventional British perceptions of the consuls who served in the Levant. However, the examination of his story is indicative of how difficult for a British consul was to act within the limits of his power, even if he was intended to be an exemplary consul who aimed only at applying the British interest in his consular district. Such a task of consular mediation could prove to be very risky for the consul because it could either be perceived as direct intervention in Ottoman political affairs or excite jealousy and suspicion of the Ottoman authorities and other consuls. Most importantly, it might encourage Christians to believe they would receive support in their opposition to the government. For the accomplishment of a mutual understanding between the Christians and the Ottoman authorities, Sandwith understood that there was a prerequisite, the boost of both the Christians and the Muslim confidence in each other, but also the Ottoman authority. However, to achieve this, he had to indirectly and unofficially participate in the island's governance. Finally, it should be pointed out that there was not a similar consular contribution during the previous arrangement of a constitution in Crete almost 10 years before, during the 1866-1869 revolt. At that time, the European and Ottoman diplomats participated in discussions without being obliged to travel to the Cretan mountainous villages to meet the Christian insurgents, as Sandwith did. However, 10 years later, the sittings of Berlin, due to the sittings of Berlin, there was no room for discussion on the Cretan affairs. Thus, an alternative path should have been followed, the replacement of the upper diplomacy with the consular service. The second case of Ongley illustrates how a consul violated his duties not to defend the British policy, but to serve personal interests. Ongley was the first consul in Crete after the dissolution of the Levant Company and its replacement by the Foreign Office. He also held the longest consulship for 20 years, from 1837 to 1858. This lengthy period coincides with two insurrections in 1841 and 1858. The intervening period between 1841 and 1858 is the longest period of tranquility in Crete. And this makes Ongli's case very interesting, as a period of peace provides an opportunity for a consul to exercise his personal consular policy more freely, because he would feel a lower sense of supervision from the foreign office and the embassy in Istanbul. At the beginning of his tenure, there appears to be a personal animosity between the governor Mustafa Pasha and Ongli, making the latter with the charge of encouraging the Christian rebels in 1841. However, about halfway throughout his tenure, there was a sudden turn in Ongli's relationship with Mustafa Pasha, leading to an overly friendly relationship with him and his son Veli Pasha. This relationship essentially led to the governance of the island by Veli Pasha and Ongli. Apparently, Ongli's actions did not appear to deviate from the British official policy. However, his overly close relationship with Veli was directly related to his enmity with the French consul, with whom he was instructed to cooperate in a common effort of Britain and France after the Crimean War to modernize the Ottoman Empire, known as Tanzimat. So, due to Ongli and Veli's personal alliance, the community of consuls of the great powers, which supported the stability of the Ottoman Empire, found itself completely divided. This behavior of Ongli gave his superiors the impression that he was partially responsible for the insurrection that broke out in Crete in 1858, and was the reason for his transfer from Crete in the same year. The reason behind Ongli's change of policy had to do, on the one hand, with the improvement of his personal position in the consular community and the assistance and support he received from Mustafa and Veli Pasha to serve his own business and commercial interests. The third story deals with Charles Dixon, a consul who violated his duties during the period of the 1866-1869 revolt. More specifically, on 8 September 1868, he instructed a British captain to proceed and cruise his vessel close to the western coast of the island. There, he had to afford refuge to any Christian in distress who would seek protection on board and get them to a Greek port. This initiative resulted in the arrival on 13 December 1866 of a great number of women, children, wounded, and injured men at the Greek port of Piraeus. The Foreign Office perceived this as a clear breach of neutrality and the official British policy of not intervention, by which London indirectly supported the porter. Dixon's breach of duties during this insurrection was solely based on humanitarian basis. The consul was neither related to any Philhellenic transnational lobby nor any supporter of the union of the island with Greece. Dixon's disobedience is worth mentioning because it strongly left its mark on the European concert. The impact of his initiative was related to the impression given to the European governments regarding the deviance of British policy of supporting the Ottoman possession of Crete via neutrality and non-intervention. This impression, in turn, impinged on the increase of feelings of sympathy for the Christians throughout Europe, which influenced the European governments. By the same token, it sounded the alarm within the Ottoman Empire and boosted the Christians' desire to continue fighting under the hope of European intervention. What Dixon actually managed in practice was to raise more dynamically the issue of the need to transport Christian civilians out of Crete to save them from acts of cruelty or certain death. After Dixon's first act, the rest of the European powers followed with similar enterprises of transportation of Cretan civilians, regardless the Ottoman prohibition. The final story is that of the vice consul in Heraklion, Lysimachos Kalokerinos, who was found to be involved in a secret organization that provided the Christian insurgents with money, weapons, ammunition, and military information during the same insurrection, that of 1866. So, due to his Ionian origin, his involvement was driven by the growing Greek national sentiment among the Ionians of Crete. More specifically, Lysimachus participated in secret organization, which acted as an intermediate link in the logistic network between the insurrectionary committee of Syria and the Christian insurgents. The leading figure behind this organization was his personal friend and the vice consul of Russia at the same city. His name was Ioannis Mitsotakis. Moreover, it was not only a common national sense that brought Kalokerinou into close cooperation with Mitsotakis and a common undermining of their consular duties. Both were also engaged in swap commerce. It was the most basic exportable good of Crete during the middle 19th century. Mitsotakis and Kalokerinou were not partners. However, their acquaintance and their mutual trust had probably evolved during their commercial relationship. Swap making and trading was the main handicraft activity, and Heraklion was it was the basic, the most important city of this product. Based on their connection as swap merchants, they further developed their relationship in the period of 1866-1869. Otherwise, had they been commercial rivals, they would not have cooperated in such a dangerous venture that required such a high level of trust. So, these four stories are not simply presented one after another. Throughout their narrative, constant comparisons are made as the book explores four different kinds of violations or exceedances of consular duties, each with a distinct motivation. In the first case, it involved serving British interests regarding the Ottoman control of Crete. In the second, the motivations were the improvement of micropolitical status within the consular community and the expansion of a consul's business. The third case revolved around humanitarian concern aimed at reducing unnecessary loss of life. Lastly, Greek nationalism motivated the fourth case. Each of these cases had different impacts stemming from consular behavior, either positive or negative, concerning the expression of British official policy, allowing for meaningful comparisons. Another field of comparison was related to the two main elements from which the power of a consul originates and how they were utilized. First, the political support of the great power they served, and second, the support from networking in the local community where they lived. The stories of Sandwith, Ongli, and Kalokerinou are perfect examples about this. For example, Sandwith possessed both until the end, and he used them wisely. This was the main cause of his success. Ongli, on the other hand, used the first prerequisite only as an element to develop the second one. Kalokerinou, on his side, could not have the approval of his superior in his task. However, he was dependent on the second parameter, his deep involvement with the local element, and used the first kind of power only for camouflaging camouflaging his illegal consular operations. The above, combined with more careful movements, resulted in his violation of duties never to be disclosed. By comparison, Onglei's exceedance of duties were to some extent covered and justified with the excuse of an attempt to support the Ottoman authorities in implementing the Tanzimat reform and the processes of modernization of the Ottoman Empire. However, Onglei was the one who was removed, while Kalokerinou remained. This contrast ending between Onglei and Kalokerinou has to do with these two prerequisites from which the consular power originated. By so openly, for example, Onglei exceeding his duties and exposing his close cooperation with Veli Pasha under the illusion that his actions had been excused and justified by the advocacy of the British political interests, Onglei lost first the support of the local community, and this led to the losing of the other parameter, the support of his superiors. At this point, I would like to mention that the book does not only deal with these four stories. These micro-histories are placed within the broader networks of the island that include players from different nations and backgrounds in an approach to combine micro-history with macro-history. British consular officials had formed relationships with various members of the local community and were actively involved in social, political, and economic networks that had a significant impact on the Cretan society. These connections were established to serve both the consular duties and personal interests. The same networks were also sometimes used for the violation or exceedance of the consular duties. Sometimes these networks were extended outside the borders of Crete. The participation of locals who had already formed their own networks in and out of Crete and set them at the service of the consular officials was also a common phenomenon. In this study, I demonstrate how networks and local alliances changed in relation to changed according to the local circumstances, regardless of the development of the European concert and the official policies of the great power. Many times, the behavior expressed by these local groups on the Cretan society during a crisis period was the result of pre-existing alliances or family ties among consular groups that had been formed earlier during periods of peace. For example, Onglei's hostile relationship with the Ottoman Valley during the Crimean War did not align with the diplomacy of the European concert. The same applies to Kalokerinou's friendly relationship with Mitsotakis during the 1866 revolt. As you see, we know that during the Great Cretan Revolt of 1866, there was a rivalry among Great Britain, France, and Russia, but the vice consuls of the three great powers in Heraklion had common commercial ties, and they were also friends. The book also analyzes how business relates to the shaping of networks and their actions during an insurrectionary period, taking into account the business activity of Mustafa, Veli Pasha, Kalokerinou, Onglei, and Mitsotakis. However, beyond the consuls of the great powers, the book reveals the involvement of further parts of the local society, such as Ionians, local clergy, prominent locals, in the formation of the consular networks, showing a picture of Cretan society and revealing that the national issue is indeed the most important, but not the only factor that should be considered in the study of national issues such as the Cretan question. Furthermore, this study of relationships demonstrates how the professionalization of the British consular service influences the creation of networks and the way consular duties are carried out. Finally, with reference to the legacy left by the Egyptian occupation in Crete that ended in the 1840, regarding individuals as well as governance economy practices that played a significant role in the creation of these networks, the study of British consuls provide an opportunity to shed light on such elements that were the legacy of the Egyptian rule. Lastly, the book deals with the subject of mutual perceptions between consuls and the locals. In the last main chapter, I try to explain that in order to understand how the British consuls and the Ottoman subject in Crete perceived one another, the question what each side anticipated from the other should be set as a basis. Therefore, the Christians' expectation of union with Greece in their near or far future made the Christians create two contradictory perceptions of the British. The first was the British as occupiers who would deprive them of the national goal. The second was the British as saviors who would either take the island under their control to pass it to the Greek state or somehow intervene in favor of this goal. This contradiction reflects the confusion of the Christians, the confusion that the Christians had fallen into under this growing insurrectionary climate. The British consuls, from their side, anticipated that the Ottoman subject of Crete would make their political duties more manageable. Under this perspective, the British consuls had to distinguish between those who would help them or who would place no obstacle during their political duties and those who would not. In other words, their classification criteria were related to the support or opposition they received in persuading the Ottoman millet subjects to coexist peacefully under Ottoman authority and support reforms. Under this viewpoint, a new parameter came on the surface beside the national one. That is the material parameter. Or in other words, what each individual had to lose in terms of property in case of uprisings. Thus, from the consular perspective, there was a correlation between property and nationalism, which divided all the Ottoman Christians between those who had something to lose during the warlike attempts to achieve union with Greece, and those who had not. The first was the part that made the service of the British consuls easier, and the second was a continuous headache for them. Both groups contained Christians and Muslims. It was during the 1870s, the end of the period that the book deals with, that the perspectives of both the British and the majority of the locals intersected to some extent. So, to close with, I would like to emphasize that there were individuals associated with the Levantine Heritage Foundation that were crucial and instrumental in conducting my research. For example, David Barhart was the first to identify the close relationship between Ongle and Veli Pasha, and he had published a chapter titled Veli Pasha and Consul Ongle, an Anglo-Ottoman diplomatic relationship that got too close. I was saddened to learn that, to recently learn that he's not longer alive. Otherwise, I'm sure that he would join us in this meeting. I also benefited from an online publication by Charlie Sarrell. He's a descendant of Sarrell Ongle, and from the list of the British consular officials published by the foundation. So my next piece of research involves another consular family that is quite well known to the society, to the Levantine Heritage Foundation. It is Biliotti family. The reason I'm thinking to focus on this family is not related to the fact that Alfred Biliotti served in Crete during the late 19th century, but to the fact that Alfred was maybe the most recognized consul in the Foreign Office and the most recognized among the diplomats that during this period they used to underestimate the consuls. What also triggered me is that Bilioti family's involvement in various consular districts in the Levant, such as Makri, Rhodos, Lesbos, Chios, Castellorizo, Crete, and Thessaloniki. It was again Barhat, the first who explored Alfred Biliotti's persona, and the first who noted substantial gaps in his life story and expressed hope for future researchers to fill these gaps. So now my presentation has come to an end. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Okay. Thank you very much, Iosif, for that presentation. And we're now open for questions and comments. So if anyone would like to open with a question or a comment, please indicate. Meanwhile, maybe I could ask something. I mean, in looking at the consuls like Sandwith, I mean, did you track their careers to see if there was sort of similar, let's say, behavior? You know, let's say if you take the case of Sandwith, you know, he was sort of acting perhaps in the interests of the community and local diplomacy. Did that independence, that effective delegation of authority, go to other posts where he was sent?
So you mean if I have pointed similar actions from other consuls? I don't.
Yeah, taking the consuls that you studied, how did you follow how they acted in other postings that they had in other countries or other cities?
Okay. For example, regarding Sandwith, I have not researched, but I know that he was consul in Cyprus before. When in Cyprus there was a vice consulate under the British consulate of Damascus, and I think here they had a completely different behavior because he was focused on archaeology. It was a different consular district. There was no insurrection. It was, I think, a peaceful island. So I think he communicated with Layard, with the Assyriologist, the non-Assyriologist Layard, who was also ambassador in Istanbul during that period. So I think yes, it depends on the consular district. From one point, since the mid-19th century, I think that due to the growing insurrectionary climate, a consul should be well experienced in the Levant in order to serve in Crete. For this reason, perhaps Bilioti served in the very late 19th century during a great insurrection that led to autonomy. So, however, even if in Crete during the eras of Sandwith, they knew, for example, that there were antiquities that later excavated by Minos, Kalokerinos, and Evans, Sandwith never focused on archaeology. This is
and another thought. I mean, it was their independence of action, sort of independence of either their ambassadors or from London. Was that a function of the slow speed of communications as well?
You mean that
I mean, I can't remember when the telegraph was
introduced. You are right. I remember when during my research I noted how much time there was need for the transportation of the correspondence between Crete and Istanbul. And okay, the transportation was made by steamships of Lloyd's company. And I think from Crete to Istanbul, there was a need of approximately 7 to 10 days from Crete to Istanbul. Now, from Crete to London, I'm not sure, because if there was the correspondence from Kania to Trieste and there to London. But I think the Levantine consuls were the only ones that communicated at the same time with both Foreign Office and the embassy.
Okay, so Anna Lashopoulou, would you like to ask a question or comment?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Hi, Iosif. Nice to see you. Congratulations on the book, and thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Listen, I'm in Munich, so it's 2 hours later than where you are. My bedtime's coming close, so please cut me off if I ask a really stupid question. I've heard some presentation of yours before, but today somehow it struck me like this Kalogerino, was that his name?
Yes.
Guy, and his connections to Mitsotakis, and obviously something like I don't want to say revolutionary tendency, but if I understood correctly, there was some, like he had some agenda maybe, and that made me wonder, can you, or have you, and I've just missed it, or otherwise, can you say something on how the Brits, like how Britain would choose the governors? And like, if I wonder now that if they choose a Greek governor, or like a Greek, not governor, sorry, consul, and they don't remove him, because I was also struck that you said there were like 2 violations of duty, but only the English one was removed and Kalogerino's was not removed. Did I
Yes,
get
I made
that
a comparison.
right? Yeah, in the comparison, right.
The comparison.
Okay, right, but that means that he was not removed. Am I completely off if I wonder, could that have been a tacit like support of Kalogerino and his goals from British side? So how do they choose? Like there's the Sandwith guy and there's the Ogle guy, but how did they then choose this one Greek who obviously has contacts that are probably dangerous or obscure? Or did I get this completely wrong now?
No. First of all, the fact that the vice consul, the Ionian vice consul of Britain in Heraklion supported indirectly the insurrectionaries, the Christians, does not imply that the Great Britain supported the insurrection. I'm sure that Consul Dixon, that was the direct superior of Kalkerino during this period, Consul Dixon was not aware of it. I had read in his letter of him that I am aware of a network that provides the Christians with ammunition, etc., money, etc. But and it is it's Consul Mitsotakis, the head of this. So he did not know anything about the act of Kalokerinos. Now, why they chose Greek or Ionian, mainly Ionian people? The reason is that they had to follow the practices of the Levant Company. They knew the Great Britain, the Englishmen of the Foreign Office were aware. They thought that they presented the Ionians and the local Levantines as corrupted, for example, but it was not easy when George Canning passed Levant Company to Foreign Office. It was not easy to make a sudden professionalization. The professionalization actually ended at the beginning of 20th century. So they had to follow practices of the Levant Company. For example, it was not an easy task to find someone who knows Greek language or Turkish language, and they had to make use of the benefits of these locals, even if they did not like them. Another example is that of a practice of the Levant Company that Foreign Office did not like, but they accepted it, is that during the era of the Levant Company, all the consuls and vice consuls were merchants. In the Act of Canning in 1878, it was officially prohibited for a consul to be also a merchant because it would had a negative impact on his consular conduct. Also, he had to help the other British merchants and not to be in a rival relation with them, but they had to accept it because otherwise they had to pay a higher salary. For example, the fact that Ongle was a merchant was a practice of the Levant Company that unofficially had to be followed by the Foreign Office, even if they don't want it.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Okay, Mick McTiernan.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much indeed. Very, very interesting talk, I thought. Couple of quick questions. One, I'm in London. Where can I get hold of your book? And the second is about Calcarino.
yes.
I mean, he died. He met a rather unfortunate death during the events of August the 6th.
Yes.
I've come across a source somewhere, I can't for the life of me remember what it is now, which suggests that one of the reasons that he and his family were picked on was because he was one of the biggest money lenders on the island, and he was not a particularly popular person.
Yes.
And my impression was he wasn't particularly popular with the Cretan Christians, and certainly not with the Cretan Muslims. My other comment, though, looking at Biliotti, it's interesting if you look at the British newspaper reports of Biliotti during the 1897-98 revolt, that half of the newspapers are condemning him for being pro-Turkish or pro-Ottoman, and the other half of the newspapers are praising him for doing everything he can to save the Christians from Kandanos in particular, or the Turks from Kandanos in particular. And so he's held up by the, if you like, by the liberal press as a devil, and by the conservative press as some sort of hero. But I don't know whether that might be worth something looking into.
Regarding Calcarino family, yes, they were money lenders with high interest to both Christians and Muslims. Especially his father, Andreas Calcarino, who came from Kerigo, was a money lender, and he engaged in swap trade too. He was not he was not favorable to some Christians, but I think that the trading part of Crete was only a minority, so only them had to deal with Calcarino. But you are right, for example, and lending in high interest was a problem also for farmers, because when they do not have a high harvest, they had to lend. And since the second half of 19th century, another secondary reason, for insurrections The first, okay, was Union of Crete or autonomy. And a second, for example, a secondary reason was we want banks in order to save us from for money lenders. I know that nowadays it sounds very very different because, okay, the banks sometimes lend with high rates, but during that period, people farmers wanted bank in order to save themselves from lenders like Kallikerino. I don't know the fact that Lysimachus did it, to what extent he did, but his father, I'm sure. The same action did Mustafa Pasha, for example. And he was the main rival of Kallikerino because both were money lenders, both controlled the commerce of olive oil and the production of oil, and they both highly participated in the export of olive oil and trade. So when, for example, when Consul Ongley had an animosity with Mustafa Pasha, Kallikerino, he had a rival relation with Kallikerino. He had a good relation with Kallikerino. When Ongley with Mustafa were alliances, Kallikerino family was a rival of Ongley. And for this reason, when Ongley was to be removed from Crete in 1858, the next year, Kallikerino was put in the British Consular Service because before there were rivalries, commercial rivalries. So it sounds complicated. You should read the book in order to understand it.
I'll read the book if I can find it.
In Amazon, I think in UK.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.
Another question for me. I think you mentioned that the Maltese, there were members of the Maltese community that were sometimes consuls or vice consuls. Is that correct?
You mean groups of...
You mentioned the Maltese, but I thought it was in the context of some vice consuls or consuls being appointed from that community. Or did I hear wrong?
No, if consuls and vice consuls were appointed from...
Well, I thought you mentioned some Maltese community, but maybe...
No, I mean, perhaps I can, if you want, I can share again the screen. Perhaps you mean that they were involved in multiple actions and they had a connection with different groups. This is what...
And I think there was one consul, but a French consul who was Maltese. And I was surprised because I thought, yeah, maybe the British had more influence in Malta than the French.
I understand. You mean the animosity between the British consul and the French consul during the era of Crimean War? No.
I'm just asking about the Maltese. I thought you mentioned that there were Maltese consuls. You identified one that was consul for France. I was just interested if you had any more information about...
if a consul could serve more than one great power?
No.
Because
No.
there was
Never mind. Let's leave that.
I think the Maltese can be a difficult word. Any consuls from Malta? The island of Malta.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes, of course. Amabel Litar, for example, was a Maltese consul. Amabel Litar was a vice consul in Heraklion. Yes. He was the only consul, the only vice consul from Malta. The other one came from Ionian Islands. Yes. Okay. Sorry for that. Thank you, Zainab.
I said it. Any last question? Thanks, Zainab, for sort of helping us through that model. Any last questions or comments for Iosif?
I actually have one.
Go ahead.
In terms of the archives,
Yes.
is there anything in Crete, in the old consulate buildings, or is everything shipped to London?
What kind of consular correspondence?
No,
British?
consular records. I am thinking, for example, the foreigners living in Crete, especially the British subjects, British citizens, they had to do some transactions specifically, obviously, for the property records. Any kind of official business, they have to conduct that in the consular business if they were British citizens. They could be, the Beratlı, those who acquired British citizenship later on, rather than the natural born Brits. But any transaction had to be done in the consular building. So are there any records kept in Crete?
Okay, yes. Every year, in the beginning of each consular year, the consul made a list of the British and Ionians of Crete. There are consular records in British consular microfilms of Foreign Office of consular correspondence in Crete in Venizelos Foundation. There are some microfilms. I have there are also in the Academy of Athens in terms of microfilms. So in Crete, I was benefiting more from local archives of locals.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, a little bit. Thank you.
Well, if you had to ask again, please.
No, I am for the Istanbul consular records, the British or the Italian or the Belgian consulates. If, for example, a British citizen wanted to buy property, they
Okay.
had to register it. They had to get a letter from their council to give it to the, to the Ottoman government, or any inheritance. All the notarial acts had to be done in the consular building. So those records, are they surviving?
I have met with this kind of records. Okay, regarding the right of a foreigner to buy land. Okay, I think it was prohibited until the era of Tanzimat, but unofficially it was allowed even before the era of Tanzimat. Okay, I have read, for example, that during the era of Mustafa Pasha, I mean the governor of Muhammad Ali that continued to rule the island after the return of Crete to the Porte, that he prohibited, for example, to Greeks to Greek subjects to buy land, or he prohibited from Ionians who were British citizens to buy land in the interior. And I was impressed because, for example, Ongle said that, okay, complained to the embassy about that, and he said that it was unofficially, it was allowed to other parts of Ottoman Empire, but all these facts and records before the era of Tanzimat. And it was a small headache for me because I was trying to understand. I asked some Ottomanists, okay, what's about the land? When it was officially allowed, when it was not, if it was made or not. I think it was it depends on the vilayet of each on the vilayet.
Yeah. Welcome to the study of property in the Ottoman Empire.
Yes, I was very curious about it.
Zeynep is the specialist. Excellent. Thank you for that question. So unless there's anything else, can I thank you, Iosif, very much for your interesting presentation and for answering the questions. And we look forward to following up with you and if you would like to give us the details of where your book can be purchased, we will make that available to
I
anybody
can
who's interested.
write it to
You send it to
the-
Craig or post it in the chat. We can do that. But send it to us anyway, and then we will be the intermediaries.
for example, I can share it with in the chat, for example, in there, if you want. Okay.
Just email it. Just
Okay,
email
okay. Okay, but I think in the Amazon it's
very much, and we wish everybody a very good evening.
okay. Thank you very much again.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.